Thanks for that introduction. I wish it was shorter. And, as I teach my kids, low expectations are the key to life. Um, I am delighted to be here in a room full of my people. Even if I haven't met you yet, I consider you my people because you're here at I think, the law school doing the most exciting work in innovation and tech in the country, with the most talented faculty and students. The presentations this morning were terrific. I am always looking for new ways to collaborate with Suffolk, with Dean Perlman, and it's lucky for me to be here. I was the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court until December of 2022. I started at the AAA in February of 2023. As you know, Sam Altman rocked our world in November of 2022. I had already accepted this new job, hadn't started it yet, and it was basically all I was thinking about was what it was going to mean for an organization that's been serving the legal profession for almost 100 years. And I think the answer is a lot. And I'm just going to show you how good I am at tech by figuring out how to move the slides. Good thing you invited me to a tech conference. David, what's the I'm doing what?
The mouse on the slide deck.
So here?
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Will this work? Oh yeah. So just briefly, I'm actually gonna try and finish talking in time to take any questions in case that's more interesting. I feel like people don't want to be talked at for too long, so I will whip through my slides and hopefully give you an overview of the kinds of things I've been thinking about working on, but then happy to take questions about any of it. I'm going to tell you what I think about why this moment is driving change, what I think are the hallmarks of innovation and frameworks for change, what I see as some of the barriers in the legal profession to getting that done. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I approached that, or we approached that, I should say. I actually have two amazing team members here today at the AAA, and why I think it matters for the rule of law and public confidence in the justice system. Yeah, I'm going to get all high and mighty at the end. So I don't have, this is nice because I can flip through these quickly in this particular audience. Not always true in every legal audience I talk to. In fact, in some legal audiences, they're still surprised to see how quickly people started using this technology, and that's going to end up being impactful even for lawyers who've done a really good job resisting technological innovation for forever. This one detail about the UBE and how GPT-4 performed on it as opposed to ChatGPT is the one thing that usually does get lawyers' attention if they think they can not focus on this technology when they learn that in March of 2023, GPT-4 passed the bar exam. It did it. It scored in the top 10%, but it did it in 6 minutes. That usually focuses their attention, that this might be a technology that they have to reckon with. It's a weird technology though, right? It's agentic, it's adaptive, it's amiable, it's arcane. What does that sound like? What does that remind you of? Humans. It's like humans, right? It's like us. And that makes it really different from every other important or disruptive technology that we've been successfully able to avoid. In addition to that, most law firms' clients are talking about it and talking about it a lot, using it a lot, sometimes even asking their lawyers about how they're going to use it to make their legal services more effective, more efficient, and faster. This has been tricky, I have found, in different legal audiences for lots of reasons. I think some of them are cultural, some of them are historical, some of them are actually legal. We're a profession based on a commitment to what happened before. That makes it really tricky to figure out how to adapt to what's going to happen next. There are probably more reasons than these, but I think these are some of the big ones. We have really siloed information in legal. This is even true with adapting to this technology. You'll see that a lot of private law firms are not telling their story of what they're doing with this technology yet. Private competitive legal organizations are keeping their story to themselves. Less true with public interest organizations. We're out there telling you what we're doing with the hope that we can collaborate and do more if we all work together. Lawyers don't have time. I've been trying to write a law review article for 30 years. It's got a great title. It's called Let's Do Emergencies Last. I haven't written it yet because we're always doing emergencies. There's no roadmap. The technology wasn't released with a manual. You have to figure it out for yourself. And you have to put in a lot of time to figure it out for yourself. There are lots of different problems with the technology. It's like really good at some things that you would use it for, that lawyers would use it for, and really terrible at other things lawyers would use it for. And there's no rule book that tells you what those are. That's really scary to lawyers. And it's scary in particular because of our personalities and our culture. And I'm not sure how much of this is like a chicken and how much is an egg. But maybe law schools do this, not this law school, but maybe some law schools do some of this to us, or maybe we choose law schools because our personalities are a good fit for the profession. But lawyers are far more skeptical, far more autonomous than the rest of the population. At the other end of the scale, we're apparently significantly less sociable and a lot less resilient. And it turns out sociability and resilience are actually sort of important, both for innovation and for innovation with this particular technology, in my view. In addition to that, we have a heavily regulated industry, which can clearly hinder innovation. We've seen that in lots of other highly regulated industries, and we're not different. That makes it that much more complicated and sort of scary for innovators within the profession to do some of the things that they might want to do. But what I've been saying since I started my new job, and to lots of legal audiences, is I don't think we can avoid this one. I think this is the moment that it's time to focus on what's coming our way before it focuses us in a way that we might regret. Innovation normally has this kind of slow adaptation until it all of a sudden shoots straight up, as you can see with all these other technologies in the past. And the innovator's dilemma, of course, is for those of us running highly successful organizations, it is often really hard to focus on the fact that a highly successful organization might get disrupted. And in the legal profession, there are lots of highly successful organizations and lots of smart, talented people running them to continue to do what they do better. But if you're not focused, the disruptor might go up and to the right pretty quickly. And I think this is what's really uncomfortable for a lot of lawyers. I was just at my own lunch table. We were talking about the pace of change is very unusual for us, right? The degree to which things are changing quickly and rapidly is really making it so that change is the new normal. All of our strategic planning that lays out a 10-year plan or even a 5-year plan or even a 3-year plan, or in my view, even a 12-month plan, is no longer very useful. We have to be willing to change our mindsets, change our plans, change our frameworks constantly, quarterly, more than quarterly. And that's just not necessarily something we learn to do in law school or in practice. In fact, I think sometimes, again, this law school aside, we're not that good at teaching frameworks for navigating change. It's just not a skill set that lawyers learn very well. The thing about innovation is it's a term that like lots of us are familiar with and use, but it's really a practice. And it's a practice that is structured, but also inspired. It's produced through constraints. Often your CFO will say, where's the ROI on the innovation budget? Like, where am I seeing the ROI on the innovation budget? It is absolutely important that you're willing to fail in an innovation program, a structured innovation program. And humans really have to be at the center of it. All of that, not super comfortable for most lawyers. And what we have to be doing in highly successful organizations is continuing to strengthen the present. The present is what we do now. What are the ways we can do what we do now better, faster, more efficiently, bring more value? That's really important. You can't completely ignore your legacy products and services. You have to actually be continuing to improve your legacy products and services. While editing the past, what are the things that we don't need to do anymore? They're no longer necessary for us to do. And you have to be willing to give those up, even if they're things you also did really well. And at the same time, be creating the future. And doing all three of those at the same time is super complicated for anybody, but I think it's especially complicated for people who are leading successful legal organizations, which are based on what's happened in the past, again, culturally, historically, even legally. I don't, by a show of hands, how many follows Ethan Mollick like daily? Yeah. So if you don't, start following Ethan Mollick. If you want to just keep up with what this technology is doing, he's on the faculty at Wharton, and he, I think, is the best like modern day translator of all of the scholarship being done around this technology for people who don't want to have to read the scholarship themselves. And I think this is exactly right. It's no longer the case that your engineering team is your R&D lab. All of your employees are your R&D lab if you're running a successful organization, every one of them. And these are the questions that Mollick says we should all be asking, and they're the questions that we're asking. What did you do that was valuable that's no longer valuable? What impossible things can you do now that you couldn't do before? What can you democratize and bring down market? And what can you do up market so you have new ways of competing? And those are the 4 questions I think every leader of every successful organization should be asking their team to think about every week and be developing the new services and products and operational workflows that the answers to those questions provide. I'm going to quickly tell you what that has looked like at the AAA. Which is not by no means a perfect case study, but it's a case study where we have been actively engaged in this process since early last year. But let me go back for a minute. The AAA was founded in 1926. And in 1926, arbitration, which is all we did, we do a lot more than that now. We do lots of other alternative dispute resolution, although arbitration is an enormous part of what we do, continues to be. But it was itself at that point a disruption, right? It was a new process for how to resolve disputes when the courts were overloaded. And it really was going to be a system to bring national peace and security and hopefully extend beyond domestic disputes, which of course it now does. The AAA, by the way, before I move on, has administered over 7 million cases. Last year, over 500,000 cases. We do that in all different case types and not just domestic disputes, but we are the largest provider of dispute resolution services for cross-border disputes as well. Large, successful organization, running very well. But we had to start thinking about whether this new technology was a threat or an opportunity. Usually it's going to be both. What are the short-term cases that drive efficiency and productivity? We have years and years of data that's never been licensed, more data than all of the other providers combined. That data is obviously going to be useful. What does that mean? What should we think about that? How should we prepare for some bigger bets with that? What are the predictive tools, early case evaluation tools, upstream settlement tools that parties are going to want, and they're going to definitely change the dispute resolution business? When are people going to be ready for a digital arbitrator or a digital mediator? And who are those people? What are those caseloads? What do they look like? We have a sophisticated innovation practice at the AAA. We have 4 full-time staff whose jobs are innovation in their title. There's like a vice president for innovation. She has 3 team members. We have 9 innovation teams. We have 5 innovation chairs, 44 coaches. Every single person who works for the AAA, all 700, have had 3 hours of innovation training. And we have had 477 ideas submitted on our shared company platform, which is called Bright Idea, in the last, I think, 10 months. We believe that good ideas can come from anywhere. This tool that we licensed last year called Bright Idea has been a wonderful way to connect all of us who work across the country and also in Singapore to be able to mind share excellent ideas. We've had 477 submitted. You can upvote them. You can comment on them to improve it. And almost everybody is using this tool to figure out what are the new ways in which we can improve what we do, not just with generative AI, but obviously we were very lucky, in my view, to have this very sophisticated innovation practice already underway when this technology showed up. We were lucky to have a structured innovation practice to think about what this was going to look like. We quickly set up an internal exploration group. Again, your entire workforce is your R&D lab. So this was not just engineers, although we do have an engineering team working with the technology. We set up another work group with panelists, our arbitrators, our independent contractors. They're not employees. But what were we got the co-counsel tool and now the VLEX tool, and where's Jackie Schaefer? We're going to start using ClearBrief as well, that group. And they're all using these tools, uploading use cases, meeting, talking about them, and then writing up papers and results. The internal tools turn into ideas for our innovation pipeline, and then we can figure out which ones to develop as products, new products, and services. We think of these teams as part of our lab, the staff team, the panelist team, and the IT team, all, again, discovering what the AI can do, exploring the use cases in the first phase, then experimenting with it, adopting it into our workflows, and then optimizing. You have to continue to train and improve on the tools. We have been careful to make sure that we're thinking about where the strategy aligns with our mission and our vision. And we assess the use cases. We have way more ideas than we can currently develop at any one time. In a structured-ish way to try and always consider the business case and the feasibility. How likely can we build this? And will it be something our users want? But not only that at this stage, because right now we're also trying to learn. We want to figure out how we can get better so that in the future we can do this faster. We can build things faster and get them to market faster. We started with 3 different learning pilots, each one that relied on a very niche data set. So Clause Builder AI, I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one, but each one had a Go team and a design sprint. And the methods and the tuning methods we used were 3.5 turbo and 4.0, lots of prompt engineering, lots of fine tuning. We even had some help from some students at Suffolk Law School with one of these tools. This is the first of 3. Clause Builder AI is built on GPT. It is a natural language interface for anybody wanting to build an ADR clause to put into a contract, whether you're a lawyer or a business owner that can't afford a lawyer, which is most small and medium businesses in this country, and you want to be able to make sure that you can put it in a clause that will be upheld in court. This was a great early learning tool for us because we have a data set of perfected clauses that we know stand up in court. And we were able to train this tool on that data set. When we couldn't fine tune it anymore, we've started taking demos, including with students here at this law school, to help us fine tune the model so that we can actually release it into the wild in, I think, the middle of May. There's always a little bit of a fight between my innovation team and my lawyers, but we'll get there. The automated scheduling order is already in full use. This one was a pretty easy one to build and therefore a great way to learn how to build. We took a data set of scheduling orders from arbitration cases that we have in the construction sector. We do a lot of construction cases. And then the only other data that gets put into the tool when an arbitrator uses it is the Zoom transcript from that particular preliminary hearing. It produces a draft scheduling order. The arbitrator can then, of course, make any changes. And it saves anywhere from 30 minutes to a couple of hours worth of time that people would have paid for. The third one is a filing assistant chatbot, which is also a natural language interface for people who are wanting to file a new case with the AAA, and it can walk them through how to do that. And it's pretty similar to other chatbots that you see built on GPT. We had a lot of objectives for this phase, but I will tell you the primary one is learning what we're comfortable with, learning what we're good at, learning what we can do fast, so that we can prepare for some broader enterprise adoption and integration, and probably some much bigger tools in the future. We have a bunch of things in the pipeline, and I'm going to talk faster because I told you I would get to questions, and I'm going to. But we have a number of next ideas in our pipeline for what to build next, and that they keep growing. Somebody referred to one of the tools we're about to introduce last week in a group email and called it something different than it was. And I hopped right on and I was like, no, that's not what it does. It's this other thing, but that's a great idea. I said to the VP of Innovation, I'm like, put it in the list and I want to talk about it next week. Like, can we build that one next? So, so many ideas for what you can do with this technology. Okay, I want to get back to why I am excited about this beyond what we can do with the AAA, although the AAA is going to be a great place to be able to introduce some tools that will help lots of people resolve disputes with more success than they right now have options. You all know all of the ways in which we have tried as a profession to make sure that we can provide equal access to justice to all of our neighbors. It hasn't really worked. In fact, even though we've put more and more effort and resources towards all of these solutions, we have more people right now struggling to get help with civil legal problems than we did half a century ago by a lot. You know these stats as well. 92% of our neighbors can't afford legal help with their civil justice problems. The National Center for State Courts keeps track of how many people are represented in state court cases, and only in about 24% of civil cases are both parties represented. That means most people are navigating their civil justice problems without lawyers in that weird language that they don't speak or understand. And the Rule of Law Index, released late last year, ranks the United States 115th out of 140 countries on the accessibility and affordability of civil justice. The top left slide is a surgical suite in 1890. Below it is a modern surgical suite. If you dropped a surgeon from 1890 into a modern surgical suite, she would not know where she was. I know there were no women surgeons, but you know what I mean. If you dropped a lawyer from the Iron County Courthouse in 1890, in the middle of the photo, into today's Iron County Courthouse, he would be absolutely comfortable. He could do absolutely everything without any hiccups. He'd be a little weird. He might think the clothes are weird, but otherwise, totally fine navigating it. That says so much about why this is going to be such a disruptive moment for the legal profession, and why I think this law school is doing such a wonderful job training you for the future and using your talents on real live problems that help real people right now. And this is why I think it matters at the end of the day. The National Center for State Courts does an annual survey on trust and confidence, and they release the results like they always do just recently. And this probably doesn't surprise you. Most people no longer think that courts deliver equal access to justice. That's just not what the public doesn't think that anymore. And you know, the rule of law is only a set of ideas. And it's only as good as the public's confidence in those ideas. Judges don't have an army to enforce their orders. They don't have money. They don't print money. The whole ballgame is public confidence. And when the red line crosses the blue line, I think we're in trouble. I think we're in trouble. I mean that to be alarming. They also did some focus groups this year. They don't always do that. They did. And in every single one of the focus groups, people said and agreed there are two justice systems. There's a justice system for the haves and a justice system for the have-nots. I think that there is a tremendous upside opportunity to grow public confidence as a result of this moment of disruption. And I want all smart, creative people focused on exactly that. Thank you for having me. I know I went a little longer than possible, but I can take questions if you have time.
We definitely have time for some questions. Here's a softball one from the online folks. UPL challenges have been a hindrance to innovation in legal. They'd love to hear how you can explain that the clause builder avoids UPL. And for those unauthorized practice of law.
Yeah, my general counsel would be like, she can't answer that. It's, of course, giving legal information, not legal advice.
Okay. Questions?
I know these answers. Yeah.
Thanks. Dean Perlman did a good job talking about all the different ways you've helped different industries innovate. I want to personally thank you for your leadership in the courts, the pandemic response team. The courts would not be where they are today. We took advantage of that disruption, and it was a lot of that was your leadership. So I want to ask you now that now we're a few years removed from that, and you have all this experience on the other side of the fence at arbitration, and all this experience with AI and innovation, being in a very innovative group. What are the lessons learned for the courts? How would, if you were back in your old job, what would you do differently now?
I actually think it's such a tremendous opportunity for any innovative court leader right now to build some really tremendously helpful tools to the people you serve. But there are very few courts that are doing that, and there are lots of reasons for that that aren't that are understandable. Public funding is complicated. You have to. I literally had to go convince the legislature every year that we had a pretty great self-help represented litigant website that was even pre-AI, but even so was a wonderful tool. But to convince the legislator to fund it every year took me about 2 months, every year of like lobbying individual legislators. I would find who the local judge was, and if the local judge had a friend with someone who was friends with him. It was like, it's a hot mess just to convince people that this basic level of service was pretty important. That's a problem. In addition to that, there's politics in state Supreme Courts often, right? And there's more now than there was 10 years ago. And that's complicated too. So it's really hard for court leaders. I've been doing a lot of generative AI 101 for courts, usually like Chatham House rules. They usually want me to present without live streaming it so they can ask questions and not feel inhibited. But sometimes I'm doing them in public as well. So there are courts that are definitely interested. If I were running a court right now, and I talk a lot to the current Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court, who's pretty Gen AI forward and has a Gen AI forward state court administrator. So I think watch that space for some interesting stuff. It would be such a great opportunity to start creating some really helpful chatbots, right? The first thing I would do is every helpful chatbot for every kind of case where you see large numbers of self-represented litigants, and your chatbots can speak in any language, right? They can really help people with at least understanding what the questions are they're facing and what they might do about it. But I mean, I wish I could tell you I was super optimistic that courts all over were going to be able to do that quickly. For the reasons I said before, I think there are lots of barriers. One of the things that I think sums up how that plays out for me in a way that's a little bit sad is one of the things we learned during the pandemic was when you offer people remote options for appearing, self-represented litigants are far less likely to default. We actually have data on that now because, we ran an experiment that actually collected data for us, which was amazing because for the most part, courts aren't very good at collecting data. And even though that's true, like we know that eviction dockets and debt collection dockets see far fewer defaults. You know how many states have permanent remote participation processes? I think it's like 5. The rest of them have all gone back to the way it always was. I don't even understand how you could do it. Like, that this process serves the people in your community significantly better than the process you used before, and you're just gonna go back to what you did before. Oops, that took a sad downward turn. Who has a happy question?
I don't know we can guarantee happy questions. But...
So I get to go again. The question is, we know that the state courts where you have absolutely no bias, right? But no, the real question is, how are you using AI to both ferret out bias and for quality control?
Well, I think this is actually one of the most interesting, sort of sets of questions with this technology. And it's actually one of the reasons why I hear from lots of lawyers and judges who are looking for reasons not to have to learn anything about this technology. They'll say, oh, no, because it replicates all the biases and all the data that it's trained on. And of course, that's right. That's how the technology works. If it's trained on biased data, it's going to have biases in it. But it's a lot easier to debias a data set than it is to debias a human being. And if you haven't seen the studies on criminal sentencings leading up to elections or right before lunch, I encourage you to check out the human factors that often show up in judicial decisions. So my view is it's a really important issue that anybody who's building a tool, especially a tool that's going to be used for resolving disputes under the rule of law, has to focus on. But there are teams that focus on this, and I think there's more upside potential in debiasing these tools than you could quickly debias your state court judiciary, for example.
One more question. Oh, I saw first. Maybe if it's a short question, we get to.
Real quick, because of all the information we have in the newspapers today about the concerns with things like deep fakes and hallucinations, how do you see that playing out? And you raised the concern about the public's perception of the courts today. So there's a lot that's kind of in the balance as we go forward with this. I wondered if you had any sort of take on that.
Yeah, I think well, I hear two questions there, and there are probably 10, but because I think deepfakes and hallucinations are slightly different. I'm still mad at that guy in New York for that hallucination attempt, because he's like set us back 6 months. The New York Times literally covered it every day for like 3 weeks. I think they're still covering it. I mean, that one guy did more to set back the potential upsides of what this technology might do for the rule of law than anybody else. I think hallucination stories are usually about the lawyer, not the technology, right? That's a story about a lawyer who did not understand the technology she was using or he was using. It's usually he was using. Sorry, that's just the stories I've seen reported. I'm sure it's, yeah. But you have an ethical obligation to understand the technology you're using, both its upsides and its risks. And so that's a story about the lawyer. I mean, I assume that lawyer would also have turned in a brief submitted by a law student that was citing improper information, because obviously that lawyer was not a lawyer who checked the work of his assistant. Deepfakes are far more complicated, and from what I understand about the technology, are a growing problem. I think the technology right now, every time they build something to detect whether a video or an audio message is a fake, the technology can get around it. And I think that cat and mouse game is going to be really, really difficult for courts, again, because of the resource issue. And therefore, in addition to the public funding, for courts to compete in hiring technologists with the private sector right now it's not a fair fight, right? It's not a fair fight. So I think that's going to be really difficult. It's actually at the AAA, we're actually building a panel of experts to be able to take on these disputes, because I think many of them are going to have to choose other forms of dispute resolution where they know that they have decision makers who have the resources and the training to be able to make some of those decisions. But I think that's actually one of the hardest parts of this technology for courts right now. As you also know, very, very few cases end up going to trial, which is where a deepfake would do the most damage, right? I mean, there are sometimes an evidentiary process before trial where it would matter. But most cases are resolved long before there's any disputed evidentiary hearing or trial. So I don't think that the worry about that technological problem should inhibit us at the front end and should inhibit innovation at the front end. I sure hope it doesn't.
But I had seen 2 hands at roughly the same time on that last call. So we're going to get one last question.
Okay, thank you. So I think I've kind of heard you touch on this tangentially, but I haven't heard it addressed from the group as a whole. Maybe this is something for you and for everybody else here. We talk about the most marginalized populations around the world, but I think what we haven't really discussed is people who are currently confined. So has your organization thought about what that would look like to bring services to people who are in prison?
That's a great question. I wonder if there are any prisons right now allowing use of generative AI. I doubt it. You know, we had an arrangement when I was in Michigan because we had a pretty innovative director of the Department of Corrections allowing pro se filings from prisons while I was the Chief Justice. But I don't believe they had access to the internet. So it was really just a portal to the court. So I bet there are tons of use cases, but for use by people in prisons, it's going to be a while. For use by organizations helping people in prisons, I think there is that's limited only by our imagination right now. There's some, I think, reviews that can be done of previous convictions that would be really exciting, what you could expedite and look for. You know, I talk a lot about the change in arson science in like the 2012, 2014, and which is, that's another story. Invite me back. I have great slides on that too. But it changed so dramatically that there is a really good reason to believe that a lot of people who were convicted of arson from 1988 and before are wrongfully convicted, like a lot of them. And there is no process in courts or in any other place to just go review convictions. You know, we're obsessed with finality, and it's something we don't do. And I think the use cases are really tremendously exciting for that.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Okay, here's where I get to use a prop. Now, the problem is I've heard that the weather might be going either way. So we have these wonderful things. I'm telling you this now because I'm not going to give them to you until right before we dismiss to go have the time. So we're going to come back. We're going to have 2 more panels. Then we'll dismiss for an hour, which will get you there. We're not totality here, but we should get like 98%. Hopefully, we'll see something through any clouds, if there are any. We're gonna hold on to these though until we let you out. So that's my way of saying, please come back after a 5-minute break, so you can stretch your legs and go to the bathroom. All right, I'll let Sam take it away.
So once your AI has helped you create a legal document, what do you do with it? I'm Sam Glover, and this is my first day at work. I've been working for Suffolk for a little over 2 months, but this is my first day in the office. I've been working from my home in Minneapolis, so it's kind of cool. Eventually, I'll get to see the rest of the building, but I'm locked in here today. It's my initiation. I was brought on board to help scale a project that started during the pandemic, and I'm not going to say any more than that because Bryce is going to talk about it in a little bit. But it involves the document assembly line that you heard about earlier, and that is kind of all about providing a workshop for our students to help the courts provide greater access to justice. It's kind of my dream job, which is why I wound up here after being all but done with the legal industry when I left lawyers back in 2020. So I'm really thrilled to be here and working on this project, which is kind of what I've always wanted to do in the law. All right, let me tee up this panel. So I bet everyone here has clicked submit on at least one form in the last 24 hours, if not week or 3. Well, I think e-filing is basically the submit button for the legal system, but a lot of courts don't have one, right? At best, they have a download or a print button, But for most courts, most jurisdictions, and definitely for most self-represented litigants, the submit button is either missing or grayed out. So what would it take to enable a submit button in every jurisdiction for every litigant, especially since we know that, 75% of litigants are actually not lawyers? To help us figure that out, we have Lisa Colpoys, who is from the Stanford Filing Fairness Project. We have Sarah Hoskinson from the Kansas courts. We have Bryce Willey, formerly of the Lit Lab, and we have Colin MacArthur from the Free Law Project. And consistent with my laziness as a host of a podcast for many, many, many episodes, I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you who they are and what they do. You can stay behind the panel, use the mic, whatever you like.
All right. Hi. I get to go first. And I'm Lisa Colpoys. My very short agenda here, I think I have like 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to try not to go over. So I'm going to probably talk fast. But I want to tell you who I am and what I do, talk about some challenges with e-filing, really kind of set the stage for the rest of the presenters, and then introduce you to the Filing Fairness Toolkit, which is a resource that my team has developed to help courts with modernizing their systems. So I'm the Justice Innovation Lead at the Filing Fairness Project, which is housed at the Deborah L. Rohde Center on the Legal Profession at Stanford Law School. I've been there since about June, and I joined this very august group of innovators, and I'm delighted to be in this role. You likely know many of these people. I don't need to introduce them. So what is the Filing Fairness Project? We're really focused on helping courts modernize their forms and filing systems, connecting them with technology, companies, working across jurisdictions to improve court filing systems. The project actually emerged from a Stanford Policy Lab class, which was a class of interdisciplinary students from the design school, law school, engineering school, who did some research on how tech solutions might be able to improve the court filing systems. If you'd like to learn more about our project, we've got a website there, filingfairnessproject.law.stanford.edu. Check it out. Some of the goals of our project are to, well, increase access to justice. I think a lot of us in the room want to do that, but we want to try to do that by improving partnerships between tech vendors and courts, by developing resources for those tech vendors and courts to use as guides in order to move this part of their work forward, facilitating relationships, and we're really focused on encouraging an end-to-end solution for a seamless user experience. So currently, if you're familiar with e-filing systems, they're made up of many components, and oftentimes a user or a filer has to access many different systems in order to electronically file. It's not easy for anyone, even lawyers. And so we're encouraging this end-to-end solution and trying to work with courts to implement that. So what are some of the challenges that we've seen in the electronic filing landscape? Things that we've uncovered, which many of you I'm sure have seen as well, include a patchwork of unconnected systems. Why is that important? Well, end users don't know what these different platforms are and how they need to access them. And it makes it very difficult for people to use electronic filing systems. There's a lack of choice for filers. Why is that important? Well, not all filers are created equally. So some are lawyers, and they have different motivations than self-represented litigants. So lawyers may want to connect their electronic filing to their practice management systems, where Self-represented litigants may want a very easy-to-use, simplified system. In some states, self-represented litigants are not even allowed to e-file, which, well, that stands by itself. Vendor misalignment with access to justice goals. You know, some vendors, it depends upon the type of e-filing vendor that you are engaging with. Some may be very motivated to serve lawyers because they have a business model that's reflective of fees for filing or for connecting with add-on services that they provide to lawyers. So those motivation or those motivations may not align with your court's access to justice goals. We've already heard from students this morning that there are indecipherable court forms in this world, in every court, and that it's a big challenge, especially for self-represented folks. And then there's other burdensome in-person filing requirements like wet signatures, notarization, in-person payment requirements, all things that make e-filing very difficult for people, not just self-represented, but lawyers as well. So I want to just drill in on this patchwork of unconnected systems. And I can thank Jim Cabral from InfoTrack for this graphic, which was developed by Mission Critical Partners. And this shows what Electronic Filing Manager, which is a court-side e-filing component, which ones are used in every state. It looks like a rainbow. And so this really demonstrates how unconnected all these systems are. And if we drill down even more and put it on a map, you can see how they are in every state different, but also in some states, like a couple of them there, looks like Ohio and maybe Pennsylvania, maybe 6 or 7 different e-filing managers that are being used. So again, this unconnected system, you also can see that there are some larger players in the system, in this market. You can take from that what you'd like, whether that's good or bad. But I thought that this was really interesting just to see this map was enlightening to show how disconnected the system is. So we've attempted to try to help courts solve some of these problems by developing a filing fairness toolkit. The toolkit encourages courts to do several things, like adopt national standards that will help them connect these disconnected systems by using, again, national standards and APIs, creating a marketplace of filing options so that users have options and opportunities, maybe creating vendor certification protocols so that you can make sure that your vendors are aligning with your access to justice goals, improving data collection so you can better understand what your users need, standardizing, simplifying, automating forms, and then putting into place electronic processes for signatures, notarization, payments. We've broken down our filing fairness toolkit, which you can check out on our website, into 4 different areas where we provide some diagnostic tools that courts can use to diagnose their problems, see where they stand, compare them with maturity models to other states, and take recommendations and best practices. We are hoping to work with courts across the country, and we're already working with a handful on some projects. These are just some ideas. Note the one, connect document assembly tools seamlessly to e-filing. That's one that we're really, really keen on now. And I think you'll hear more about that in just a few minutes. All right, so that's what I've got. And I'm going to pass it to Sarah. Are you using?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Hoskinson. I'm the Chief of Access to Justice Initiatives for the Kansas Judicial Branch. I also serve as special counsel to the judicial administrator there, so I'm involved in a lot of different administrative aspects of the court system in Kansas. And I'm curious, are there any other court people here? Okay, where are you guys from? Oh, okay. So, I've been with the court system for about 10 years in various capacities. I started out as a staff attorney. I did legislative work, and throughout that time, I was looking at different access to justice issues. And a couple years ago, I finally got the opportunity to start focusing on access to justice in Kansas. And I feel like in a lot of ways, we're playing catch up and trying to make advances in access to justice in the state while also coming up with certain solutions that a lot of other states have already accomplished. That includes self-represented litigant e-filing. So we are unfortunately one of the states that, as Lisa mentioned, doesn't have access to our e-filing system for self-represented litigants. And it's a significant priority right now to ensure that that happens. The reason why it hasn't happened yet is because our e-filing system was built for attorneys. And to give you an illustration of what that looks like, when you're using an e-filing system in our state, you have to understand exactly how the legal system works. You'd be confronted essentially with an initial choice of different case types of broad categories. If you would have to know that civil means, for instance, I need to get a debt paid. You have to know that civil means I need to evict someone. And once you go into that civil case type, then you're going to have 76 options for all the different case types you could choose from there. And once you choose the right one, and let's say it was eviction and you're looking for forcible detainer, then you're going to have 140 different document types that you can choose from in that category. And this is beyond confusing for a lot of self-represented litigants who don't even understand what the word civil means in the context of the legal system at times. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And it's something that in talking with other states, people have enacted different e-filing systems for self-represented litigants, but they're not happy with how it's working for them. And I know in Illinois, Lisa's got a really innovative solution that involves people having to essentially provide answers to self-represented litigants. And if you have the ability to do that, I think that's the gold standard. Having a knowledgeable person guiding someone through the system is the gold standard, but it's not possible everywhere. And so we're trying to develop an SRL e-filing system that will be navigable by people who don't understand the legal system. And right now we're engaged with Georgetown and their Judicial Innovation Fellowship. And we have a legal technologist, a design fellow who's working on developing an e-filing system for us on the design side that will hopefully be easier to navigate. So that's essentially what we're working on in Kansas. We're also part of the Filing Fairness Project with Stanford. And it's an initiative that's also been very helpful in gathering ideas. And I'm really grateful to Suffolk for inviting me here today. It's great to be in a room with people who are thinking big ideas, get mired down in a lot of details day to day in working for the court system. And so really encouraged by hearing about all the work that you all are doing and thinking about all the possibilities there.
So, hi, everyone. My name is Bryce Willey. I was a software engineer by trade, don't have a legal degree or anything, and based here in Boston. And until October of last year, for about 3 years, I was a clinical fellow with the Lit Lab. I sort of considered myself sort of the lead engineer on a lot of the lab's different projects. I worked on a lot of things, worked with a lot of great students, got to meet these students as well who presented this morning. But the relevant project for this panel was the fact that I made Suffolk's e-filing service provider, or EFSP. So when I joined the lab in December 2020, they had just finished an incredible sprint during that summer of gathering lots of different volunteers who had a lot of extra time on their hands from the COVID shutdown. And using all of that energy and all of that excitement, they made about 30 online guided forums for self-represented litigants in Massachusetts, many of which were critical for urgent matters. And so for a few of those guided forums, the lab made an agreement with with Massachusetts state courts as well, both just the state courts and the appeals court specifically, on saying that when a self-represented person finished that form, they could either print it out or they could sort of email the court directly using our website. And that was e-filing. At the time, you could e-file, which is just email. However, when I joined the lab, we started looking at sort of the next frontier, which is what we're talking about now, actually e-filing, getting all of that party and case information directly into the court's case management system. And Lisa sort of alluded to this a little bit, and I was going to take a slight aside just to sort of explain a bit more about those different parties, or all of those different sort of partners and people in the e-filing ecosystem. And so to start, there's the court. They have all of their actual information for cases sitting on their case management systems. There's the e-filing manager, which is sort of owned by the court, not always run by the court, like that map that Lisa showed. There are dozens of different EFMs out there. We specifically worked a lot with Tyler Technologies, and that's sort of what I'm most mentally familiar with. And then in front of that, there's also the EFSP, which is sort of what Suffolk did. And essentially, EFSPs are companies, organizations. Suffolk's not a company, but they're organizations who make software, sort of that's usually just a website, as well as some backend software to actually talk to the EFM. And they sort of can, like sort of both Lisa and Taylor, Sarah and Lisa mentioned, they can tailor those the sort of experience of filing to specific audiences. So if you have, you could have a specific EFSP that's really has a lot of good features for filing in criminal cases. Or in Suffolk's case, we really wanted to build a sort of self-represented first EFSP, or self-represented litigant first EFSP. And then there's the public, who actually go to these EFSPs, go to which send our information to the EFM, which gets the information into the court. Clerks can go in and accept or send filings back to the public, et cetera. So those are sort of the main four players there. And at Suffolk, we were also trying to replicate the success of making a lot of different forms in a few other states when I started. So we quickly started up a pilot working with Illinois Legal Aid Online. Shout out to Matt Newstead, and who we worked with very, very closely when making this form. And after a bit longer than we expected, essentially 3 years, we had 2 e-fileable guided interviews. We had one in Illinois, and we had one with the Massachusetts Appeals Court. And so you might notice that 2 is much smaller than the 20 or 30 we were able to make in that summer. And my position on this panel will hopefully be to expand and talk a lot about sort of the difficulties that we had, and what we could do to make the ecosystem better and easier to use from the technology standpoint. But sort of some of the things at a high level, some of the things that made it difficult for us were the fact we had a small dev team. It was maybe about 3/4 of my time and a small bit of Quentin's time as well, working on the FSP. There are various technology issues and less issues and more of just complications and things that are very complex to deal with. Lots of sort of complicated processes that we needed to go through, both with the EFMs and sometimes with courts themselves, and as well as sort of like also like Lisa alluded to various state internal standardization issues. So the map where Ohio had a bunch of different EFMs you were using, the map also doesn't mention that in Illinois, each of those 102 counties each court has a different set of cases that you can file and a different different ways of getting that information in. So something might be like the same type of filing might be called 3 or 4 or 5 different things throughout the whole state, even though they are on a sort of single EFM unified state system. All of these sort of standardization issues get in the way. But that's what I will continue talking about later. So.
All right, so hello, my name is Colin MacArthur. I am the product manager and user researcher for our filing project at the Free Law Project. And Sam asked me here today to talk a little bit about our project and what we're doing, and in particular about what open source e-filing is and what that might mean and why that might be important. So I thought I'd better start with, well, what is Free Law Project, number one, and two, what is open source software? So open source software is software where the programming code is widely published and freely available, right? So anyone can run the system, anyone can inspect the system and the way it works on the inside, anyone can download the code and tweak it to make it better. And anyone can build their own tools that integrate with that system. Open source software is often maintained not just by one organization, not just by one vendor, but by a community or a group of organizations and individuals. And open source software is not new. So most of the internet, most of the critical infrastructure we use runs on open source software, and major systems in other parts of our government are also run on open source software. So at Free Law Project, we've been building and maintaining open source software that provides open access to primary legal materials since 2010, so not new. Millions of people use Court Listener to find online case law for free. Several of the tools that you heard about earlier today rely on data from Court Listener to make themselves work. And so open source tools are actually already a part of our ecosystem. And so now we find ourselves asking, well, how can open source contribute to e-filing and case management challenges in general? So just to highlight a couple of the things we've heard from other panelists and throughout the day today. We know that it's often hard to make these systems work together, right? So if you find talking to self-represented litigants that it'd be really great for one system to hand the person off from one place to another, pass certain data from one place to another easily and simply, that turns out to be a very complicated technical thing to do. Also, if in the course of doing something like the usability testing we heard about today, you want to not just change the form, but the case management system that form goes into and that maybe a litigant looks at from the outside, that can be an extremely expensive, long endeavor with the vendor who creates that system, or not. Open source tools can, if constructed the right way, help with some of these issues, right? We can at least create options in the marketplace that lower the cost of customizing and hopefully create some standards or at least some movement towards further interoperability. Now, if any of you are technology people in the room, you will be saying, this guy is nuts. There's no way they're going to build an open source case management system in a couple of years. These things are incredibly big and complicated. And you're absolutely right. We understand that filing, so EFSP, EFM, the end case management systems are big systems. And so we're looking for places to start where we can use our resources, our technical expertise to make the most difference, particularly for access to justice problems. And so one of the reasons why I'm here is to look for ideas and partners, right? So if you are a court or you work with courts and you thought, oh gosh, wouldn't it be great if we had an X or a Y? We had a portal for self-represented litigants that worked differently, or we had an EFM, an electronic filing manager that was better for this purpose. I'd love to hear about it. So please come and find me, tall and bald, and I can talk with you about what we're thinking, and maybe we can incorporate some of your ideas into the system. The other thing I just want to say is we're going to do our process of building this openly too. So we're not just going to disappear into a corner and build something and then fling it out at the internet. Go to our website, free.law, subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll be able to see updates of this project and what we're discovering and what we're doing. So I'm happy to talk more about the details in our thinking, but I think I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everyone. If you guys have questions, feel free to put your hand up in the breaks between my questions, or you could always, I guess those of you who are watching online, go ahead and put them in the chat like usual. But let me start off. I'm curious about something that that Bryce teed up, but I bet you all have thoughts on. During the pandemic, every court tried new things. I think that's true. I think every court in the country tried new things to try and make the courts accessible to people who couldn't show up at the courthouse, including opening up e-filing. And in a lot of courts, I think, Sarah, you and I were talking about this, like, I think Kansas maybe has 1 or 2 kinds of things that can be filed. And this, when Bryce was talking, it reminded me of that part of our conversation, because what was it about those 1 or 2 things that couldn't be replicated across the board?
So the 1 or 2 things in Kansas that a self-represented litigant can e-file: a protection order. We have a protection order portal. You can see it at www.kspop.org. And the reason why we set that up is obviously probably you could understand the urgency of being able to file for a protection order, especially if a court is unavailable. In Kansas, the courts never completely shut down, but there were times when, of course, the courthouse itself was physically unavailable. And that whole process was built around paper forms that people would often obtain at the courthouse. And so we used some of the funds that were available during the pandemic to build this portal that guides people through the process of filing for a protection order. And there's 4 different types you can get in Kansas, and there's different flows for each one of those. And we did that pretty quickly, set up that portal, and it's actually been very popular and very successful, but it's also time consuming to maintain and to adjust. And so the specter of doing that type of guided interview for every single type of filing possible is pretty daunting from a court perspective, based on the staffing that we have available.
Can I ask what makes it time consuming?
Essentially, I mean, there's a lot of thought that anyone who's developed a guided interview knows there's a lot of thought that goes into how you word things, especially when you're trying to plain language, legal concepts. And people can disagree on how the best way is to do that. And there's a lot of caution in trying to make sure you're not misleading someone or prompting the wrong answer or accidentally giving legal advice or whatever the particular issue is. So that's time consuming. Also making the systems talk correctly. And one of the frustrations in the court system, somebody mentioned earlier, competing for a technologist, it's not a fair fight. So we often wind up in the middle sometimes of different systems and different vendors, developers, and you have an issue and it's always the other person's fault or the other entity's fault, and you don't know the answer necessarily. And so that can be time consuming.
Was it the setup piece or the ongoing piece, or both?
Both. There was definitely a lot of work involved in the setup, and we were, in that particular context, we were working with, domestic violence advocates. We were working with people throughout the court system, clerks, and trying to get everybody's perspective on it in a really compressed time frame.
Yeah.
And but the upkeep of it is just day to day. There can be issues that arise, and you need to be able to troubleshoot those issues. That particular case type, we have people out in the community, domestic violence advocates, who help guide people through the system, and that's kind of unique. You don't have that for small claims and some of the other case types that involve a lot of self-represented litigants. But the other portal we have is for marriage licenses, and that was another, in Kansas, the clerks of the district court issue the marriage licenses, and so I know it's different in different states, but those are the 2 things where we set up portals pretty quickly for people to be able to file. And we're kind of building on that and trying to figure out what's going to be the right platform going forward for all different case types.
Yeah. I suppose it's like with a lot of things, you get started, you have some success, and then you realize what a daunting task it is to scale that thing or acquire the expertise or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. At least I assume that checks out with what you're seeing nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, I think during the pandemic, what a lot of courts did was they put stopgap measures into place, like they allowed people to e-file their petitions into the clerk's office. That's not sustainable. I mean, it just adds more.
By e-file, you mean email?
Oh,
like Bryce alluded to?
Like email. Yeah, I meant email. Not
email filing?
Email e-filing isn't real e-filing. I mean, it's something, but it's not really sustainable on the clerk's side for them to accept email petitions or pleadings or court documents. And that was one of the solutions that many courts implemented during the pandemic. And that's not a sustainable solution.
I'm going to change the subject unless Bryce or Colin, I had a new question for you. And this is maybe for all of you, really. but Colin, maybe you could weigh in first. I feel like courts and lawyers generally seem reluctant about open source software, despite the fact that every single one of you is using open source software every single day, right? This is an iPhone. It runs on Unix, which is an open source operating system that also runs the internet. If you have an Android phone, your Android phone runs on Linux. We all use it and rely on it every single day. But for some reason, courts and lawyers do seem reluctant about it. So I'd challenge you, what's your best argument against open source software for justice infrastructure like e-filing? Why is it the wrong choice?
So I think the root of your
you could come up with a really good reason too, which makes me question my entire existence. But
or mine too. I mean, we'll see. But
carry on.
No, I think the root of your question is, okay, for what situations and courts are open source tools appropriate, and when are other things more appropriate? And for what I'd say right now is this: I think that not all open source software is created the same, right? Mm-hmm. There's a big difference between some random tool that I find on Google or Perplexity or something AI powered versus a piece of mature software that has an established developer community and is widely used in lots of organizations, right? So there are actually case management systems in the open source world today. They're just not maintained, and they're not something that we would want anyone to implement. But there are also mature open source technologies in use in the federal government, for example, in Article 1 courts that we can learn from. So what I'd say is, overall, the argument for the most important thing for courts to consider is this piece of software going to help me achieve my goals over time? And my goals shouldn't just be, okay, I want to get this thing out the door. It should be things like what I heard you talking about. How customizable is this piece of software? Can this actually help me meet the needs of kind of fitting into all of the places it needs to? And what will be the cost, not just today, but tomorrow of doing that, right? And if the answer at the end of that is a vendor that we work really well with, that's great. But what I think we're trying to say is we want a diverse marketplace of options for courts.
Remember Google Wave and Google Plus?
That's right.
Yeah.
No longer.
Going with a vendor doesn't necessarily mean, right, that you will have that longevity, but
exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for arguing against your own job.
I did my best.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the audience? I want to give equal time here. Oh, we do. You know what? In the front. Go ahead, Mark.
I'll speak loud, but is anyone using Sally or other ontologies to deal with this interoperability question?
I'll give a brief. Sally is, I forgot what it stands for, but it's an attempt to create a list of all of the legal categories of things. It's trying to categorize everything, every billing code, every legal matter type, every court matter type, and create sort of an open, agreed on standard that everyone can use. Started by my friend Damian Reel, who was also at the first TBD law that got Jason Morris where he is, and David and I and everything. So I'm just going to toot my own hair there, but that's what Sally is sort of an attempt to create a list of everything legal. And your question was, is anybody using that? Yeah.
I really wish we could. I think whenever we were developing our EFSP, I think Damian pointed out Sally to us maybe like 6 months or a year into the process, and it looked really promising and it was really great. But the big but was that we still at the end of the day needed to do sort of adhere to what the EFM was actually would actually accept. And while we could have tried to sort of use Sally internally and sort of try and map all these things around, the complexity of okay, now here this Illinois county says that an appearance is called appearance parentheses jury demand 6 ppl period. That's exactly what it's called, and you need to know that's what it's called. That's still the difficult part there. And like I said, since we're a really small dev team, I sort of kept Sally in my eye, but sort of had to had to deal with focusing on the sort of what we actually needed, which was talking to the EFM.
So it's basically like until courts and software vendors come together and agree to standardize on Sally, it's not really a practical thing.
From my perspective,
yeah, okay.
As a developer, but I'm sure there are other perspectives there.
Lisa, I assume, I think I saw Sally in your, in the toolkit as one of the recommendations. Is that right?
Probably in a footnote.
Okay. I could have sworn I saw it in there somewhere.
One of the recommendations is to use the electronic court filing standards, which are ECF standards, which have been around for quite a while and which most of the major vendors use, but they don't always use the most up-to-date versions. And states that have homegrown e-filing systems often don't use them. And so there is a lack of standards being used.
I think that this moves me to another question that I have, which maybe Colin, I know you're early in your journey of discovery here. Colin just joined Free Law Projects a few weeks ago, really.
Yep.
Right.
Just
has a background in justice tech, but is new to this project. I guess what I'm wondering, and either Colin or Lisa might be, or maybe Bryce, I don't know, whoever is the right person to ask this, but is one court system more similar to another court system than it is different, or is it the opposite? Because I feel like it's tempting to just say, oh, all courts should be able to do similar things, but the more I learn, the more I'm not sure that that's right.
So I think it's definitely a key question for building shared software in any space. What I just say is courts are definitely a situation where there's many different layers and distinctions of granularity with many different customized systems and needs. And thus, software has to be able to adapt to that. Software should adapt to the human context that it works in. But courts in the justice system aren't unique in that way, right? Like there are lots of elements of our highly decentralized American government that have similar challenges. And so I think what we've seen in other spheres is that often there's some core that you can build in a piece of software that serves the needs of 80% of people's, or at least sort of 60% of the needs of 80% of the people. And then you think about how you make that software customizable or workable for the space. I think the other pattern that you see, and I think I've heard about it in courts and e-filing systems, is that when a vendor becomes widespread, what they support and how they build also ends up shaping how the processes work within courts, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the what vendors support actually end up shaping the needs of the court. It's a bidirectional thing.
So if you built a piece of software that has Sally built in, but you allow customization, you sort of create a magnetism towards those default.
Right. This is the argument, right? And what I would just say about Sally, I feel the need to channel Damien. He is a very strong guy. Is that I think he would point out that Sally actually maps its data elements to lots of other standards, right? Including the existing e-filing standards. And so I think it's not really a competitive. I think he's not thinking of it as a competitive ontology, but more as something that can help us glue together and have some kinds of crosswalks. Exactly, right? And so from that perspective, I think one hope would be the more systems embrace ontologies like that, the easier it will be for them to interoperate.
I would just add that it may not matter if one court is the same as the other, as long as they are using the same standards and their systems can connect with each other through APIs.
Yeah.
So building that interoperability into their systems is really important.
I mean, you've got green bubbles and blue bubbles in your messages, right? But we all use the same emojis because those are actually an international standard. That's kind of what we're hoping to get. We're trying to become email or rich text or whatever. David, have you got any curious questions from the online world?
Mark has a question back there.
Nothing big. We got back there.
Can I see hands again? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I'm Mark O'Brien from Pro Bono Net. I know that technology and data standardization challenges of e-filing are serious, but it strikes me that there's actually a sort of economic model for understanding whether this is a public good or a private service that is what explains why the system has actually privileged the private services that have an audience that could pay for it and should deserve to be well served by the systems that are growing up. But it seems to me that courts, as much as they have complex challenges around understanding what are the best open source or closed source or vendors or internal resources to maintain their technologies, have to think about whether designing systems to actually include the participation in their e-courts vision of the largest portion of the population that they're trying to get into those is something that they can reasonably expect those users and the do-gooders of the world who want to serve the needs of those people to subsidize for the courts, or whether this isn't actually a resource and investment challenge rather than a technology challenge.
Is there a question mark on that?
I think it's a self-executing statement.
Okay. How are we doing on time here? Okay. I'm going to ask a big question to wrap up, and I'll want each of you to weigh in on it. I know there's a couple of other hands out there, and hopefully we can still get to them too, but I think this one is worth it. Each of you has a different perspective, but a pretty broad perspective. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the biggest one or two obstacles standing between where we are now, which is we've sort of tried a few things. Lots of courts have tried a few things, and we know where we want to get to. I think a lot of courts know where they want to get to. So what's standing between where we are now and where you think we ought to get to in the future? And maybe say where you think we ought to get to, just in case we're not all on the same page about that. Anybody can go first. I'll play law professor and pick names. I'm not faculty, but I can pretend. Go ahead.
I don't.
You're closest to it, maybe.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think the self-executing comment that was just made is really, is that Mark? I'm forgetting who that was back there. Anyway, that goal of recognizing the public good, of having a navigable system that people understand is a tremendous goal, and it's something that we've thought of as sort of a luxury, and have kind of accepted that this is what we have available. The legal system is inherently not understandable, that you need to have an attorney, and that if you can't afford an attorney and you can't understand the system, well, that's your issue, right? But I think the court system and the legal system as a whole really needs to start viewing this as that is a responsibility of the system that we're building, is that it needs to be something that people can easily understand. And while there's important questions related to UPL and legal information versus legal advice, people need to be able to get the same level of service, in one court to another, one county to another. And for me, e-filing is one step in that direction of how you can standardize that type of service that people are obtaining, to the extent they have electronic access, of course. And so I also, one thing through this filing fairness project, that we talked about different models, what could work, how do we support this when we're all working with different levels of resources, and the idea of having a compact of states that supports a system, whether it's too ambitious to think the entire country would be on a single electronic highway, but at least, a compact of states that supports a system like that, so that it's maintainable long-term, I think is a really neat idea.
Biggest obstacles? Or whatever you feel like responding to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything.
No, it's totally fine.
I agree with everything Sarah said. I do think that courts need to financially support all of their customers with tools so that they can use the system. And in a digital world, that includes digital tools, and the court should be paying for it.
And by customers, you mean court users?
All court users, yeah. I do think, though, that adoption of many of these tools has been a problem. And so that may be because of digital divide. It may be because the tools are not designed well. There's many reasons why that may be. And so I think that we need to consider this continuum of digital services so that there are perhaps human elements that can be accessed for people who maybe can't use a fully digital service. And so I think that, you know, maybe our dream of having a fully digital service that everyone can use is just that, a dream, and maybe it's not really achievable. I don't know the answer, but I think that trying to slot in human elements and human support along the way is something that we should be trying.
I remember when I'm from Minnesota, and when the Minnesota courts were talking about building their e-filing system, which is for both self-represented and lawyers, self-represented litigants and lawyers. One of the challenges they were talking about is building a system that could accept a complaint written in CRAN as well as a very nicely formatted legal document, because they wanted to be able to accommodate all of the ways in which someone might need to file. And I've always sort of kept that in the back of my mind as a good picture of the challenge. I mean, I remember seeing complaints filed in CRAN when I was doing criminal defense work and a long time ago. And yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to keep it open to people, and we talked about prisoners earlier and the additional challenges they may have by not having access to these systems, you know, you don't get to say, I don't think you can fairly say, you don't get to file a brief in that way. And so you've got to have it open to all of that. Oh. I hope I didn't just restate everything you said. It'd be a waste of time. Bryce.
Yeah, so I think I strongly agree what all of my co-panelists have said, specifically making things open, sort of adding the human component in there as well, and actually funding these things from the court. I think my decision that I'll try and contribute is the difference between simply e-file, which is sort of goes back a bit to what Sarah had mentioned about sort of giving people access to the bare bones of e-filing, of like you have to choose you have to choose the case manually, you have to sort of choose all of these customizable options that vary from court to court, which was a lot of the complexity that we ended up dealing with when making the EFSP. But notably, distinguishing that the complexity wasn't in simply dealing with that. The complexity was trying to hide that from the user, since for our e-fileable form in Illinois was an appearance. We already there was already a guided form in place that worked well. It made a PDF. And what we wanted to do was to keep almost exactly that same guided form as it was and abstract away all of the e-filing parts from the user. And that for us was the hard part. That was the part that took a good 6 months going back and forth with our colleagues at Illinois Legal Aid Online. And so I think what I'll contribute is specifically sort of opening up e-filing. I think you just need to do it. I think the software should be open, the system should be open, and it should be more publicly funded. And I think the complexity and sort of where we have to sort of not quite take careful steps, but it's more closer to a wicked problem, and which is a specific design term for problems that have a lot of intermingling connecting parts. The wicked problem is actually making it accessible for everyone and sort of improving the access to justice. You might be able to open up e-filing without improving access to justice, but that needs to be open first, is my strong stance there.
By analogy, it strikes me as like, in order to drive a car, you used to have to be a mechanic just to get the thing moving. But over time, now it's an automatic. You just push a button and it starts, and it even can drive itself sometimes. That's sort of what hiding complexity looks like over time.
Exactly.
And I think that is kind of a cool way to look at the hiding complexity is the challenge, because when you have a bunch of rules, you can just say, I don't know, you guys are licensed professionals. If you want to do it, just do it. But you can't say that to the public.
Yep.
How about you, Colin?
So I have a cop-out answer and a real answer. My
allow it.
cop-out is I don't know, but I'd really love to hear everybody's thoughts. So please come tell me what you think it is. And I say that seriously. We really are interested in hearing about people's struggles with these systems that will help us do our work better. The second thing I'll just add, in addition to co-signing what my panelists have said, is it strikes me that to us and to those of you that have worked with these systems, the distinctions between all the components are very clear and sensical, like what's an e-filing service provider versus manager versus case management system. But I think if you're a self-represented litigant, these distinctions don't mean anything to you. And I think what we can hopefully move towards is at least an experience for those people that's streamlined across their experiences in those systems, right? That makes it a sort of single path that makes sense to them instead of as organized how the systems are. I think we're a ways off from that, and that's a tricky thing to do. But I hope that having that kind of connected up, easy to accomplish path for particularly self-represented litigants is where we're going.
Okay. To avoid missing the eclipse, let's say 2 questions from the audience. And I know there were some hands up earlier, but put them up again if you have a question. If we didn't answer your question, I guess.
This is more of a comment than a question, but one of the as you said, law doesn't change. And in Massachusetts, if John Adams didn't do it, why should we? But I found more pushback around tech in doing the guided interview on protective orders and having an excellent judge saying, well, you can't give people examples of what abusive behavior is because then you're telling them what to say. I said, well, that's what an advocate says to them, and that's what a lawyer says to them. I said, but it's different if a computer says to them, they think that's their answer, so these will all be lies. Have people run into that?
I want to hand this to Mark in the audience, but I'll let you guys do this.
I was looking for my quote, which is responsive to that of David's, which is that a well-designed form allows people to express themselves in a way the court can understand. Because I think what you're doing when it comes to guided interviews, e-filing, whatever is, you're actually helping the court understand what the claims people are trying to make. I mean, you saw Quinton's demonstration earlier of how AI can get the elements out of just a blank page that somebody gets to submit, I guess. And I keep that quote in mind because I think that is kind of what we're doing here, is trying to help courts and the public communicate better.
Modernizing your e-filing systems isn't just for the end users and filers, it's also for court staff, judges. It makes it easier, more streamlined, simpler. So judges are getting better filings, more accurate, more legible, more timely. So maybe we need to spend more time convincing court judges and court staff that these modernization efforts really help them.
Sarah, is that a hard sell?
No, well, I mean, in our protection order portal, we started out with just the question specifically about, the what happened, the open-ended what happened, and then found, people would not put enough detail in there for a court to issue a temporary order, even though they might come to court later and clearly had that information, so they needed help telling their story. So we did put in information like, here's an example of something, and it hasn't resulted in people writing exactly what the example is, and so I guess there's those kinds of real world examples. And it also hasn't necessarily solved the problem because there are still instances where that's occurring where people just don't put in enough or the right information, details from their story that they need to tell. And so, that's all I can say from a real world example. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah, Bob.
One more. I guess the question that keeps gnawing at me is whether the vendors themselves of court systems are an obstacle to achieving a digital public infrastructure for e-filing. I mean, you've talked about Tyler and some of the other major players out there who are deeply entrenched, who have huge commercial stakes in doing things the way they've been doing them. They have often long-term contracts with court systems. And I'm not hearing people talking about that as an obstacle to achieving this, but am I missing something there?
No. Well, I'd like to ask third rail questions.
I would point out that the Lit Lab couldn't be doing what they're doing in Massachusetts without Tyler's cooperation. That said, does anyone have thoughts?
Yes, it depends on. I no longer work for Suffolk Lit Lab full time. Depends on how much I should say. Yes, they allow us to do this, but it's not necessarily as much as they're being actively malicious. The quick example I would give was that, like I've mentioned, our EFSP was sort of very self-represented litigant focused and self-represented sort of first. We wanted self-represented litigants to be able to fill that, and the approach we took was to make the guided interview and have that be the site that someone goes to, as opposed to here are 20 different drop downs with 700 different case types. However, most other EFSPs aren't like that, and they are closer to here are all the drop downs with sort of some extra integrations and handlings for larger firms. So when we first started working with Tyler, we sort of had to sort of show them what our interface looked like, and they had to sort of be like, oh, that's not what we're usually used to seeing. And we sort of worked back and forth, but the way we ended up having to do that is we had to make that system that was very much here are all the cases drop down. We showed that to Tyler, they went through it and they could test it and certify us the same way they tested and certified all of the other EFSPs. And then we never used that again. There are some ideas of we might try and turn that into a it's actually usable by folks, but that's as we've mentioned, that's a really hard problem. And so I think it's mostly sort of what Tyler says goes, and we do need to be certified, and there are benefits to certifying EFSPs to work with EFMs. You don't want to just sort of throw anything out to the public and say here, this should be working, and it's not actually working. But if you do things a little out of line with what Tyler might be expecting, for us, it added another 4 months of work trying to make this entire other system that did not actually help end users. It hasn't yet, at least. So.
And this is where we're close to time. And then I'll take just a couple of speakers, MC's privilege, to say is to Tyler's credit, once we were able to explain what we wanted to do, they made us the first ever nonprofit e-filing service provider.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of what Bryce was explaining was a situation where the market hadn't provided them with that exposure. So they weren't used to dealing with EFSPs that wanted to do that because the market hadn't provided, which goes back to Mark's question about, are the incentives appropriate to make something for the end user? And so I think one of the big questions it sounds like here is we're talking about incentives and underlying how do we align them all? And I think that is as we would say in Boston, a wicked hard problem.
By way of closing, I would say I think that there are at least two bubbles here. One is building, procuring software, and the other is building digital public infrastructure. There's a reason why I put that up there, because I think what we are actually doing in building the justice system and adding e-filing services to it is building infrastructure. And so right now, the Venn diagram it's not two overlapping circles. There's two circles, and one has a profit motive and the other doesn't. And they can intersect. And Tyler has been so far a cooperative partner on enlarging that intersection. But the way forward might not be through that. I don't know. So I think that's all the time we have. So let's get on to the next thing and then go watch the eclipse.
Yeah. Thank you to our panel.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, I will now bring Gabe Tenenbaum up here to move us forward into our discussion, which I'm told will end very promptly right at 3 because the sun will not wait. Well, the moon will not wait for anyone. And I'll let Gabe take it away.
In the middle. All, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time and attention. My name is Gabe Tenenbaum. I'm the Assistant Dean for Innovation, Strategic Initiatives, and Distance Education. I have the wonderful privilege today of having a brief conversation with Julia Rodgers. Julia is special in many, many, many ways. You might know her as an attorney, as the co-founder of Hello Prenup, as the star of the TV show Shark Tank, where her product became the first ever legal tech product to be funded. To me, she represents something totally different. She represents both the highest high and the lowest low of my teaching career. I was lucky enough to have Julia in class. She notified Dean Perlman before she was on Shark Tank, and she said, I'm going to be on. I can't say what happens. And Andy called me and said, you know, do you know Julia? And I said, of course, she was a wonderful student. And he said, she's going to be on Shark Tank. And I'm sure she wouldn't have told us if it wasn't a good outcome. So I was so excited. I said, one of my students that learned legal tech with me is going to be on Shark Tank. And I think she won. It was the happiest I've ever been until around 4 a.m. the next morning when I remembered that famous anecdote about the Harvard Business School student who created FedEx and got a B- for presenting that in class. I said, oh, shoot, what grade did I give Julia?
Wait, don't tell everybody.
Oh, well,
I don't remember if it was good.
The FERPA statute of limitations does not apply. I was at Dean Cove's office at 8 a.m. the next day, asking her to go into the, Julia earned an A, and she has earned an A+++ for what she has done with Hello Prenup. So this is going to be formatted as a conversation. I have some broad, open-ended questions that I want to ask Julia. We'll go until 3 o'clock, and I'll make sure that we leave a little bit of time both for online and in-person questions. So if you have them, please do be ready to do them. I'll say one other thing. You know, the way that I designed these questions was with the idea that this event is intended to inspire. And many of you have been inspired by wonderful access to justice tools and mindsets that you've heard about earlier today. Julia with Hello Prenup has created the preeminent tool for people to create prenuptial agreements without anxiety, without stress, from the comfort of their own home using document assembly tools. And my thought was some people in here might want to take a similar sort of path, whether with a document assembly tool or another legal tech project. So I'm asking these questions from that perspective. So Julia, let me ask, you graduated, you passed the bar, you had a job at a family law firm. What was the moment where you said, I'm going to do something different? I'm going to take the road less traveled by?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for that fantastic intro. I think, you know, my love of legal tech really started here at Suffolk. It started in your class, and I was working, I went to law school at night. So I had a bit of a different journey. I was working at night, working during the day, going to law school at night, and found that I could almost immediately employ the skills that I had learned at Suffolk in my job. So I started automating legal forms, kind of testing out different things with clients to see how they would react to these technologies. And this was like 2015. So it wasn't new, but it was still much newer than it is now. And so then I started realizing after talking to potential prenup clients how much they disliked hiring me. Nobody wanted to hire a divorce lawyer. And I kind of get it. You're getting married. It's uncomfortable. And that's where I thought, and Gabe's voice kind of came into my head, well, how could that be automated to make the process more efficient? How could we leverage technology to help clients or customers feel more comfortable with the process, but also increase access to that legal service? So that's where Hello Prenup was born. I wanted to create something that was faster, more cost price conscious, and also more collaborative. So, you know, in a very untech way, I started mapping it out with sticky notes on my wall, and then built Wireframe from there.
So you learned some skills here. What did we totally fail you on? Put differently, what were the skills that when you started this company, you said, I had no idea I would have to learn that you could have learned ahead of time had you known?
So I think what law schools really do a really good job at is legal analysis, legal writing, traditional skills that kind of put you in a position best fit for a big law firm or very traditional law firm. I think where law schools, and I don't put Suffolk in this category. I think Suffolk does actually an exceptional job at preparing students for the real world. But what I wish I learned more of was how to interact with clients, how to meet them where they are. And I see this every single day at Hello Prenup. So we're always asking ourselves, and I'm one of very few attorneys that work for Hello Prenup. And so I'm working with marketing people saying, well, why can't we do this? Why can't AI just give them legal advice? Like, why can't I just give them legal advice? And, I have to walk them through the why. But what they're getting at is what can we do that is best for the customer? How can we meet the customer where they are using technology? How do they want to interact with that technology? I think this is something that attorneys really need to think about. And it leads to a conversation oftentimes about price elasticity. That's something that Hello Prenup has really, I think, pushed forward, specifically in family law and prenuptial agreements, because obviously as the price goes down, the demand for the product or service goes up. And attorneys are really struggling with that. I oftentimes hear in that same point, attorneys are always saying, well, I just want to do what's best for the client. Well, I think we really need to lean into what is best for the client. Again, how do they want to interact with the technology? How do they want to find their legal services? How do they want those legal services deployed? And how can we meet them where they are?
How did being on Shark Tank change your trajectory, if at all?
That's a really good question. I like to say I would be here anyway. But I think that because we were the first legal tech platform on Shark Tank, it brought this kind of awareness to legal tech, or specifically to prenups in the context of legal tech, that maybe would not have existed for us otherwise. It made us focus on how can we be a fun company. How can we take something that's really taboo and make it really kind of like pop culture and fun to talk about? And so I think it changed our marketing. It changed the way that we interact with top of the funnel potential customers. And I think it also just brought awareness to prenups and the importance of them in a way that didn't really exist before.
What's the most challenging part of your work that isn't apparent? No doubt you're making constant decisions, you're managing all sorts of stress. What's something that's really hard that wouldn't be obvious?
Balancing, maybe this is really obvious, but balancing regulatory requirements with what the customer is looking for. So, I can't tell you how many customers they want an attorney included in their prenup for $600. They want the whole shebang, including representation, for next to nothing. And so we're always asking ourselves, like, how can we maneuver the pricing in a way that allows them to get what they want for a price that they feel comfortable with? A better example of this is e-signature and notarization. Customers want to complete the entire process online. This was not possible up until a couple of months ago when we decided to partner with Proof, formerly known as Notarize.com, also a Boston company. And we were just trying to figure out, like, how can we make this happen? We got a ton of pushback from attorneys. Even though we knew this was something customers really wanted, attorneys would say all over the country, you can't do that in my state because. And there was always you can't do that because it's family law. You can't do that because it's a personal contract. And when you really dig into the law, there's actually, you can do that. And in fact, you should. But these attorneys, again, they're not meeting the clients where they are. So that decision to partner with Proof was one that was really fraught with, oh my God, am I going against what the attorneys feel comfortable with? Because we have attorneys integrated into our platform. I'm glad we did, because ultimately, even though we have attorneys that will say, oh, what Hello Prenup is doing is wrong, like they're going to, it's illegal, whatever, it's not. We've been able to educate the consumer in a way and educate attorneys along the way to show them, actually, this is something that's great, it's really secure, and it's better for your clients.
There's a hard question I've asked you before, and I'm gonna phrase it in a nicer way than I usually do. I
Hit me.
usually ask, if your company doesn't exist in 5 years, what will be the reason? But I'm going to ask it differently, because you will, and you're enormously successful. What do you worry about professionally?
I worry about not providing enough for customers. I worry that we aren't doing enough to help deploy legal services to them in a way that they can afford. We've partnered with attorneys, right? So we have independent attorneys on the platform. That's a huge part of our business, and has become much more so in the last 6 months or so. And it was always something that was important to me. But what I do find is there's a lot of pushback from lawyers. There's a lot of pushback on the technology. There's a lot of pushback on how they're communicating with clients. There's a lot of pushback on the pricing, more specifically. And so that's my greatest concern is, are we able to deploy prenups in a way that is affordable with access to those attorney services?
So is that the future of your work, which is to say, on one end of the spectrum, traditional legal work like you started out doing, client comes in, sits in the office, you write a bespoke instrument, they get it. Other end of the spectrum, they fill out a form online with no human interaction. It sounds like what you're describing allows for more than that.
Yeah, it allows us to compete in some ways directly with traditional law firm models, right? So we're not just an online tool that you then have to either choose between online form or attorney. We're now both. I think in the same way, just to kind of answer your last question again, something else that comes to mind, I guess we're all talking about this today, is AI. I really do worry that AI will be deployed in legal tech in a way that is not responsible. I think I'm concerned that there's going to be some 17-year-old sitting in his mom's basement that comes up with something using ChatGPT that allows people to punch out prenups that aren't really prenups, and they're not enforceable, and people don't know the difference, and they're not educated on why certain legal requirements exist. So that's something else that I am deeply concerned about, as I know we all are.
A follow-up. So how do you deal with that? Is the idea to find a responsible way to incorporate generative AI with your product, or say, actually, we don't currently think that's a responsible approach, therefore we're going to use this other method?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be like suicide if I said we weren't integrating an AI at all. We are, and we're very focused on it. We're focused on doing it in a way that's responsible. We're actually integrating it in on the attorney side. So when the attorneys are editing the prenuptial agreements, they're actually editing them through our platform, and they're able to utilize AI to integrate in certain clauses or rewrite parts of the agreement much faster. We're also integrating in what we're calling a clause library. So it allows, in some ways, it's functioning a little bit like an LLM. So it's ensuring that we are pulling from relevant clauses or prenups or other information as pertains to that state. So we're trying to be as specific and responsible as possible with the use of AI.
When Chief Justice McCormack gave her her keynote, she talked about her organization's methods for coming up with new ideas and incorporating them into what they're doing. Do you have a methodology for coming up with new ideas, testing new ideas to figure out if they should be incorporated into the tool?
Yes, data. It's all data. So every member of my team has a responsibility to the company to bring forth their best ideas. Those best ideas must be backed up by data. You can't just say, it's Tuesday, it's the attorney services meeting, and I'm thinking that we should do X, Y, or Z without any reason. So we encourage an idea meritocracy. We are very focused on building direct lines of communication among our teams. And we have structured meeting formats to encourage that. But again, it must be backed up by data. And we have a lot of data, thankfully.
I have just 2 more questions, and then I'm going to cue the audience online and in person for questions. Let me ask my first of 2.
Yes.
I'm going to broaden the scope. What does success look like for you? So we know what success is for Hello Prenup. It's giving people binding high quality prenuptial agreements at a good cost from the convenience of their home without the ick factor. But you are not Hello Prenup. So like, what is success for you? Like what is a good outcome?
I think success for me is knowing that I created a platform that allows people access or democratizes access to legal information that they otherwise 5 or 10 years ago would have to pay for. And when I say that, I mean high quality information. I felt that when I worked at the law firm, potential clients really wanted quality information. You know, they were Googling, they were finding things, but they didn't really understand how to put the pieces together. One of the most gratifying parts of building Hello Prenup for me is offering access to that information to people who may never pay us. They may never use Hello Prenup. They may just, read a couple of blogs, and in fact, many of them do. We have over 70,000 users to our site every single month. I wish all of them purchased, but they don't. And that's okay, because I feel like we're doing, that's part of our mission, is to educate. So that, to me, that is success.
If someone in this room has been inspired by what you've said today and what you've done and says, I want to follow Julia's footsteps, what's a thing that they can do today to start on that path for themselves? And again, some are law students, so that's one potential answer. Others are not. Others are legal professionals, and others that are out in the world. What can they do?
I mean, I would say get started. Think about how, well, you have to really sit down and think about what is the problem you're solving, right? So if it's law, then what are the regulatory issues that you're going to run into? If you were to talk about action, like what actionable steps can they take? Go interview a bunch of people who you think might use your product and ask them what they want, because you also there has to be some type of market research and verification for the need. And then I think if you can start building something that provides information for free, then you can start using data to test different objectives.
Thank you. We do have some time, just a few minutes, for a couple of questions from the at-home audience or from the crowd. So if people do have a question, feel free to raise a hand or flag David.
I know there's at least one student later who will be talking who's being mentored by
yes,
so
Allie.
You can get more advice there. Yeah.
Hi, your story is very inspirational. Justice tech and legal tech is not a very well-known industry, sort of outside these kind of walls. What do you think is an industry maybe we could do to raise the level of, we can't all go be on Shark Tank, but we do need to do things more, I think, to get people to understand the space. So love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the question is, are you looking for access to justice awareness? I'm a huge fan of SEO. I'm a huge fan of content. I'm a huge fan of as much as I hate Reddit, I think it's I have a love-hate relationship with Reddit. Let me clarify. I think it's a really great place to access people who have questions, and oftentimes legal questions that, maybe they're not being answered properly, or they just don't know where to go. So I would say online forums and even Facebook, I see it all the time. People are asking legal questions and getting kind of off-putting legal answers from non-lawyers. So I think they need to be directed about where they can go for reliable legal information.
Any other questions? Well, now, of course, now everyone wants to do a question now. I'm going to go here because I saw it first, and then if we have time, we'll make it back.
Your story is totally inspirational, and thank you so much for being here. I wanted to understand what keeps you motivated, like in times of challenge and pushback from the industry. What has kept you motivated to keep going?
That's a great question. Customers, Hello Prenup's customers, 100%. Is something as an attorney that I loved because I loved interacting with people. I loved helping them, giving them advice, being able to hear their story. One of the hardest parts about Hello Prenup is I don't get to interact with customers on a daily basis. And very recently, we hosted a wedding for a Hello Prenup couple. They had chosen to get married solely because of Hello Prenup. They would not have gotten married without us because they called attorneys, and a prenup through attorneys was just too expensive. And the wife said, or now wife said, well, if we can't get a prenup, I'm not getting married. So that story and talking to them and getting to know them through the course of planning their wedding, I became a wedding planner for like 2 months, and getting to know them while they were here in Boston was really special. And it's those types of interactions. I don't always get that close of an interaction, but those types of interactions and stories, that's what keeps us going. And I think I can speak for my whole team when I say it's the customers. Great question.
Oh. Here, this may be a tough one. Have you had to deal with somebody trying to contest a prenup yet because of the whatever it happened to be, the signature basis or the fact that it was done online or whatever the process was? Has that come up yet?
I'm sure our customers have gotten divorced. I mean, this is like 2.5 years of, thousands of prenups. The odds are not in my favor, right? So I'm sure the vast majority of divorce cases are not litigated. I think one of the beautiful things about prenups is that they allow couples to resolve any of those divorce issues more amicably. So I have not been called into court. I have not been subpoenaed in a divorce case. I'm sure one day we will be, but we haven't yet. Again, that doesn't mean people haven't gotten divorced. And I'm very proud to say that our prenup, I've heard from attorneys, is better than many attorneys' draft. So,
well, I think that brings us to time. And there's this joke that people make when they're the last panel before lunch that you don't want to hold up lunch. Lunch can wait. Eclipses cannot. The next one is in 20 years. So I think I need to hand it to David, who might have some special materials for you and can tell you about the rest of the agenda. But before we go, Julia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Okay, we got some glasses. I'm gonna